appreciate you. And if you're new here and you enjoy whispered true crime, please consider subscribing to the channel. I post 2 times a week, on Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I recommend using headphones if you would like to hear the gentle mic brushing. Now let's get right into tonight's case. Tonight we are traveling back down to Florida. Shout out to all my friends in Florida. Now I feel like we visited California a whole lot and then Florida a whole bunch of times, and I feel like we've been to Texas a lot, and I apologize for repeating these same places, but as I've said before, I don't look for cases based on locations, and I guess it's just that those are some big states, you know, so that is why there are a lot of cases from there. So anyway, tonight we are traveling back to 1998, and this is the case of Joshua Phillips and Maddie Clifton. So let's start out with some background on Maddie Clifton. She was born on June 17th, 1990 in Jacksonville, Florida. She had a very colorful 6 days after she went missing, Josh Phillips' mother, whose name was Missy or Melissa, she went to clean her son's bedroom because it had a smell. I think you know where this is headed. And she noticed he had some incense and some air fresheners around. I guess he was trying to get rid of this smell as well. Now he had a waterbed, and she noticed a little bit of leaking under one of the corners of the platform, or beside the, at the edge there on the floor. You couldn't see under it, there's a platform. And she was thinking that must be, maybe that's where the smell is coming from, a leaky waterbed. So she went down there to clean it up, and she kind of tried to, lift up the mattress a little bit to see, where was it leaking. And the platform had like a little bit of wood that was loose, and she could open it up, reach inside, and what she found will surely be embedded in her memory forever. It was a small foot. A foot. So supposedly she instantly called her husband on the phone, Steve. She did not get through to him. She left a message, and then she ran outside. There were police outside, of course, because they were still out there working on the case, and Maddie lived right across the street, so she ran out there, and she was completely, in a panic. She ran out to talk to a police officer. She couldn't even properly communicate what was going on. So she just dragged him up to the bedroom to see for himself. She would later say, quote, "I just pointed to where they needed to look. I couldn't even go in." So sadly, they found little Maddie. She was hidden in the base of the waterbed. Like, there was a little space. I'm gonna put up a picture so you can see, like not a real image, but a drawing. There was a space in the platform that she was crammed into. And obviously she was no longer living. It appeared that one of her hands was clutching part of the frame, which leads you to believe that she was alive when she was put there. She was also wearing no pants and no underwear. So the police had the awful job of walking across the street to tell Maddie's parents what they had found. Their little Maddie was dead under the bed of Joshua Phillips, 14-year-old Joshua Phillips, who was known as a friend to them and their children. So Josh was in school at this time. The police went to the school to get him, and they brought him down to the police station for interrogation, and his parents met him there and stayed with him for the interrogation. Steve Phillips told his son to tell the truth to the police. So he explained that day, November 3rd, at around 5:15, she had come to their house and knocked on the door, and she wanted to play. And he told her that he can't play because he has chores to do, but she was very persistent. So he agreed, but he said only for a few minutes because his father would be getting home soon, and he would be angry if Maddie were there. he heard her moaning. So he went back, pulled her out from under the bed. He stabbed her some more times and then put her back there. Now, according to his mother, quote, "That's not the way he is. He's never hurt anybody," end quote. Josh explained that her pants came off when he was dragging her up to his room. After his confession, he was arrested and taken into custody. An autopsy would later show that Maddie had been beaten over the head and stabbed at least 9 times in the chest and twice in the neck. There was no sign of SA, and there was no sign that she had been hit in the eye with a baseball. So let's just stop for a second and take a look at Joshua Phillips' background. He was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania on March 17th, 1984, to Steve and Melissa Phillips. It was said that Steve used both alcohol and drugs. I couldn't find out exactly what drug. And he was emotionally and verbally abusive. Steve imposed a lot of strict rules on Joshua, and Steve got angry if other kids were in the house when Steve was not home. According to his wife Melissa, he particularly disliked young girls. She said she never understood why, and she was glad when she gave birth to a boy instead of a girl. At some point, Steve decided to move his family from Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania to Florida, leaving behind his 2 older sons, who were Joshua's half-brothers. They were much older than him. Now, Joshua had been very, very close with these half-brothers prior to the move. According to Josh's parents, he seemed completely normal to them. His mother said, quote, "He likes to read, he likes to work on the computers, and he likes to spend time with us." His half-brother, Dan, described Josh as a happy kid. And even Maddie's sister, Jessie, said that Josh seemed to be a, quote, "pretty decent kid" prior to this. Maddie's father, Steve, said that Maddie liked to play with Josh, but he also called Josh a, quote, "monster," obviously for killing Maddie. Now, at the time of the murder, Josh was a 9th grader at A. Philip Randolph Academies of Technology. He was not a problem student at all. His teachers said that he didn't stick out. One teacher said, quote, "I don't know the monster. I knew the silly little boy in my class," end quote. She said that he had friends, he was not a loner, and he liked to make the other kids laugh. It was also said that he was kind to animals. He had a dog who he took good care of, as well as 2 birds. Now, going back to the case. The case was moved to a small town in Florida called Bartow, which was 200 miles away from where the crime was committed. And that was because it would be very difficult to get an impartial jury in Jacksonville, because the people there were up in arms over what had happened. It was determined that he would be tried as an adult Josh told the psychologist that he hadn't been anxious or depressed at all. And he also said that he loves his parents. According to that psychologist, quote, "This is not what I would have seen as the typical kind of sociopath wanting to kill, wanting to maim, deriving pleasure from the pain of others kind of kid. I don't think that's true at all." But Josh did tell the psychologist that he was afraid of his father. The psychologist said, quote, "He was very terrified of his father whenever two kinds of circumstances arose. Whenever he was afraid that he had done something wrong, or whenever his father was angry at anyone," end quote. Josh had said to the psychologist, quote, "If I did something wrong, he always had kind of a short temper, and sometimes I never knew what he'd do," end quote. Josh had explained that it was that fear of his father that caused him to panic when he hit Maddie with the ball. When Josh's father heard about this fear that his son had of him, he said, quote, "Looking back on it now, there's some things I did that probably would have handled differently. I don't know if that would have made any difference," end quote. The defense attorney also hired a neurologist to examine Joshua, and he found that Josh has bilateral frontal lobe lesions, which can impair judgment as well as cause panic. But for some reason, which I don't understand, the judge would not allow that information to be presented in court. So the jury did not hear about that. It was also discovered that Joshua had been viewing violent porn on his computer a half hour before the murder occurred, and that he was also viewing this material after the murder had occurred, like right after. And it was said that Josh Maddie's entire defense was simply a closing argument. According to Josh, later on, his lawyer never attempted to question him over the events of the murder, and when the lawyer would come visit him to talk to him in prison, they would play chess and not talk about the trial. Josh's mom, Melissa, was not happy about this strategy. She disagreed with it, but Steve said just let the lawyer do what he thinks is best. So at the trial, at closing, the defense attorney argued that Joshua Phillips was not guilty of premeditated murder as the prosecutors were trying to prove. He said, quote, because of an act that began as an accident and deteriorated through panic that bordered on madness, he engaged in a monstrous act, end quote. The defense attorney believed that by admitting Joshua's role in the murder, the jurors would accept a manslaughter charge, which would result in a maximum of 15 years. But if he had been given a first-degree charge, he could face life in prison. He could not receive the death penalty due to being under 16. Now, the prosecutor said that Joshua Phillips was guilty of, quote, 3 vicious attacks in which he hit Maddie with a baseball bat, cut her throat, and then repeatedly stabbed her before hiding her body beneath his waterbed. The jurors only took 2 hours to reach a verdict, and they found him guilty of first-degree murder. At the sentencing, Maddie's father said, quote, to Joshua Phillips, we have but one thing to say. How dare you? How dare you take Maddie from us for no reason? She was a beautiful gift from God to us all, and your friend, and you brutally murdered her. May God rest your soul, end quote. Maddie's mother, Sheila, said, quote, I will never see Maddie play again. I will never see Maddie fulfill her dreams, end quote. Maddie's sister, who was now 12, Jessie, said she misses her sister and she knows that Maddie is watching over her now. She doesn't understand why Joshua would have done such a thing, especially since they were friends. And she said that Maddie had considered him her best friend. She said, quote, I don't know why God wanted Maddie to leave so early in her life, but we all have to learn to accept that, end quote. Before the judge gave the sentence, he praised the defense attorney for not presenting a defense at trial. He called his defense admirable and said those criticizing him, quote, didn't know what they were talking about, end quote. mother, Sheila, said, quote, "I believe had he not access to the materials he had, that Maddie would be sitting here right now," end quote. So she is saying that the violent PORN is what led him to kill, even though that wasn't presented in the trial, but she knew about it. Steve Phillips, Joshua's dad, said that he places some of the responsibility on Maddie, because if she hadn't been so persistent about coming over and playing that day, then this never would have happened. About a year after the trial, on June 27th, 2000, Steve Phillips was killed in a car accident. He had been driving his van without a seatbelt, and at the time of the accident, he was ejected out of his van and then died from his injuries. Maddie's parents wound up divorcing due to the stress of the murder of their daughter. Now, in prison, Joshua received his GED. He took college classes through correspondence, and he works as a paralegal in prison. He assists other inmates with their appeals, and he tutors other inmates as well. He plays guitar in a prison band, and he participates in Christian religious services and yoga. So he is said to be a, well-behaved prisoner. There were several appeals, but they were not successful. In 2012, the Supreme Court case of Miller versus Alabama ruled that sentencing juveniles to life in prison without parole is unconstitutional. So, due to that change, in September of 2016, his attorneys successfully appealed to the court, and he was granted a new sentencing hearing, which was held in June of 2017. But at the hearing, Maddie's mother requested that he not be released, so he was resentenced to life in prison. But he is eligible for resentencing again, they said, in 2023, which has already passed. And I have seen nothing about it on the internet, so I am guessing it was postponed, but I'm not sure. And he remains in prison at the current time. And that is the case. What are your thoughts? I will share some of mine. First of all, rest in peace to Maddie. What an awful end to such a short but beautiful life. My heart goes out to her family and friends. Now, what are my thoughts about what went on here? Well, I would say, in my opinion, you can throw out the whole story about playing baseball in the yard. I think none of that ever happened. What I think is she showed up at the house, and he invited her up to his bedroom after having just finished watching that PORN. He did something to her. Now, there was no evidence of SA, but not everything that you can do will leave evidence, right? And he either killed her before it, during it, after it, I don't know. Then he stuffed her under his waterbed, which obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't seem like he really planned it out. I mean, I don't think he was sitting around thinking ahead of not sure if this lawyer threw the case, you know what I mean? Threw it, like, purposely tried to lose the case. Was he being paid off, or maybe he just, hated what Joshua had done so much, which is understandable, but then you shouldn't be his lawyer. But I don't know exactly why he chose this type of a defense, but you never hear about something like this. When does it ever happen that you have no defense except for a closing argument? And the judge was happy about it. The judge praised him for it, which is also strange. So he didn't have the greatest trial. Okay. Granted. Should a 14-year-old be given life in prison with no chance of parole? Should that be a thing? Well, obviously not, because in 2012 they changed that to make it unconstitutional. And now he is going to be able to be paroled, possibly at some time. So he has been in prison for about 26 years now. He's about 40 right now. And he's been a model prisoner. Does that mean he deserves to be paroled? Not necessarily, did he complete enough punishment? Will he reoffend? I don't know the answers to those questions. Think about when he actually committed the crime. Everyone said they never would have suspected him. He had no signs. There were no red flags about this boy. So it would take a skilled professional to evaluate him to see if he is a danger, and even if it is deemed that he is safe to leave prison at some point, he certainly would need monitoring. What do you guys think? Do you think he should get out of prison? Should he get out now? Should he serve more time? Should he never get out? What do you think? Do you think he had a fair trial? I mean, of course, I'm not forgetting about what he did to poor Maddie. Completely inexcusable. Absolutely. What a horrible, horrible way to die at the hand of your friend. And the fact that she was alive for some period of time while she was under that bed is absolutely horrible to think of. And how he destroyed Maddie's entire family in this way. So, there's not much more to say here, so